So in this panel, we'll be hearing from the filmmakers responsible for all of those projects and the passions that they have for creating movement and change through cinema. So I'd love for you to help me introduce the panelists. We have Josh Weigel, the producer of Possum Trot and director, and his wife, Rebecca Weigel, a producer of Possum Trot. Kayla McCormick, the producer of Across. John Garland, one of the subjects of Across. Alejandro Monteverde, who we just heard from the director of Sound of Freedom and Cabrini. And Jared Giese, the Chief Distribution Officer of Angel Studios. And my name's Lori Heiselman. I'm the VP of PR at Angel Studios, and I'm moderating the panel, and I'm always behind the scenes, so it's kind of fun to get to be the one to ask these questions. So thank you guys so much for being here, and we'll get started. So we've teed up these questions based on your expertise and kind of how it correlates with the subject matter, but I do have a friendly reminder that we only have 50 minutes, and we will be kindly yet firmly asked to leave in 15 minutes. So if you could keep your answers a little bit short, that would be lovely. So, but also too, these questions aren't just for one person. So if this spurs on something, we'd love for this to feel more like a conversation. So I'd love for y'all to just kind of feel free to answer questions. So let's get started. So Alejandro, I'm going to tee the first one to you if that's okay. You've been quoted as saying there are some movies you want to make and some movies you have to make, suggesting you're called by God and duty to bring certain stories to the silver screen. Can you tell us more about that process and what it feels like when a story calls you? I don't think it. Number 8. The 8.
Test. Hello. 3. Well, you know, as a storyteller, there's a lot of stories that, you know, you are attracted to tell. I mean, I cannot tell the name, but yesterday I met with one of those stories that I've been chasing for 12 years. 12 years. I read a book at the airport. He's a very, 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 one of the most famous, iconic sports players in the world. And I've been chasing that film for 12 years. And finally, yesterday, I had a meeting with him, and that's a movie I want to make. And then there's the films that literally, like Sound of Freedom and Cabrini, that I didn't even know, I didn't know who Cabrini was. I had never heard of her until I read the screenplay. I didn't know anything about child trafficking until I saw that. So those are the ones that I felt called. The one I'm about to start shooting a film right now, that was definitely not a movie that I look to make. It was also knock on my door, and once they knock on your door, but the door of your soul, and your soul is inclined and is going against your intellect, that's when I know I make the difference. It's when you hear a whisper so deep inside of you that you know that that's not the ego that you have created to survive. I always say, you know, if you can hear your thoughts, I mean, you're not your thoughts. But when you can hear just that whisper that is kind of like the language, I call it the language of the soul, and it says, you must do this, that's when I separate the two projects. And so far I have not done the ones I want to make yet, but it seems it's getting close.
I'm really excited about that one. So that's a teaser for y'all out there. Yeah. So I'm going to go to Josh and Rebecca really quick. So you heard about Possum Trot, Texas. And I was curious first, when did you hear the story for the first time? And I want you guys to know they believed enough about this project that they moved their family from California to Texas to be absorbed in the community and to learn how to tell the story. So when did you encounter the story? Kind of what was that process that it got your heart enough that you would actually move your entire family to Texas to be able to tell it?
Yeah, good afternoon. has started probably for us around 12 years ago, actually, when we felt God calling us to foster children. And so it didn't make sense at the time. We had just made a short film that was going viral, and we wanted to make a feature, and God's like, no, I want you to care for vulnerable children. And we were like, okay. So we had 3 of our own children, and we ended up fostering and adopting 2 kids. We brought them into our home, and really turned our life upside down for a season where we didn't have any time to do anything else except just care for kids. And I started looking around, and Josh and I started looking around and thinking, you know, why aren't more churches doing this? Like, we needed support, we needed help. And our faith is what compelled us to care for kids. Our faith is what made us want to foster and adopt kids. And so I started, working with churches in Los Angeles County to get them more involved in the foster crisis in LA County. And I was doing an event, and I came across this story about this little church in East Texas that stepped into the foster crisis and started caring for vulnerable children and ended up adopting 77 of some of the most difficult to place children in the Texas child welfare system. And I was like, that's what needs to happen. Like, why aren't all the churches doing this? Like, if all the churches stepped in and were compelled to act the way this little church did, we could turn this whole foster crisis in America around. And so our focus shifted from the project that we were working on, that we've been working on for 14 years, into, this project. And, I asked Josh, I came to him as his wife, I said, I feel like we're supposed to tell this story, because when we share this story to churches, and when people hear this story, they're compelled to get involved. And I feel like we need to make this story so that the whole world knows about this story and starts caring for vulnerable kids.
It's amazing.
I can answer the last part of that question. So, I feel there's something kind of sacred about this kind of work. Really, the artist, I think artists do sacred work because it changes people's lives. It has such an impact. And so when we think of stories, we try to go as deep as we can with them. We try to get our arms around them, live them. And so we got to a point where with this story, I don't know how it landed in our lives. This was something that happened 25 years ago. We're just a couple of white people. This is a mostly black community. We're like, how did this come to us? But we met the families, and we're so drawn into it, and they wanted us to tell this story. And so we got to a point in the development where we felt like the only way to really do this justice is to go and be a part of the community and get as close to what that might be like as possible. As impossible as that is, let's do it. Our family was in a place where it made enough sense to do that. So after 24 years in LA, we decided let's just get out to East Texas and go deep. And it really, really brought a lot of power to the story. It won a lot of trust from from everyone, really, but these kids too. There's so many media outlets have come through and tried to tell this story, and there's just this sense of like, oh, it's just another thing. So that's why we did it, and as artists, that's what's important to us, is to take it that seriously. We're going to be expressing this story to people. It's going to have an impact in some way. Let's get as honest with it and authentic as we can.
Love it. Pastor Garland, I'm going to actually pass it to you really quickly, just because it's kind of similar. Like, your story is about a church that kind of, it revolutionized like the foster care system in Texas. So you, with your church in San Antonio, opened your church as a sanctuary for asylum seekers in San Antonio. And then you went out to be a part of a film that talks about people, not policy. What message do you hope strikes viewers the most in your story, and how do you think Across delivers the story in a way that nobody else can, kind of specifically with their church?
Yeah, I'm a pastor of a church in the middle of San Antonio. Austin, I think, is a suburb of San Antonio. It's just one of the northern suburbs. It's good to come up here and see what life is like in the suburbs. But we're in the very middle of the city, near the bus station, where the immigration crisis really came to a head in our country 8 years ago. Now, we did not decide we're going to become a sanctuary for immigrants who are suffering. We were just decorating the church for Christmas. We were setting up the nativity scene, you know, a young family and a new baby, and here on our steps are young families and babies who are desperately cold and in need of hope, and in need of a place to pray, in need of a place to sleep, in need of a place to sing. And so we didn't really make the choice. It was just obvious that we would open up our church to these families. Now, that became hundreds of families and then years of this work, but there was never a moment of making that choice, because that's what Christians do. And one of the things that I think we're all talking about is the Christian response to trauma. How do we respond to the trauma of children? How do we respond to the trauma of trafficking? How do we respond to the trauma of massive scale violence that destroys countries and drives immigration? How do we respond? And Christians have a great response to trauma. We have all these images and stories and good news. We put up a cross. Sometimes we wear the cross. This is an image of violent death. And we say, no, this is an image of hope. And then we have this ritual where we will drown people and then pull them out of the water, and we say, welcome to the family. Because what Christianity is rescuing from drowning. And then if you come to my church, we rip a body apart every week and pour blood everywhere and say, come join communion. And it's a powerful message, but what does Christian trauma response look like in our daily stories? And we found it not in the center of our church, but in the Pilgrim Church. These folks who are worshiping God, and they're seeking God, and they're seeking hope for their children by faith. And so this film, it just follows families. Follows families from Honduras, follows families from El Salvador, follows families from Central Africa, follows some of our church members down in Central America, and just following the stories of faith. We never make the choices. We're just responding to God baptizing, rescuing, God transforming trauma, God creating family out of the horrors. And that's an important thing that we have to do. Preaching is great. Preaching is great. I love to preach. But storytelling changes lives. That's where you have true stories about real people and modeling good behavior, truth and grace, and you have beautiful things happen.
Well, and I think, so Jared, I'm going to throw the next one to you. So, you know, these are all stories of trauma that we're talking about, and that often, you know, are the topics of some of these films. But I don't think that anybody dreamed that Sound of Freedom, a story about child trafficking and that trauma, was going to be the #1 independent movie of 2023 and the #10 movie of the year last year in the box office. So I think it's interesting that often people shy away from those type of stories, for one. But how do you think, just kind of speaking on behalf of Angel, can you tell us more about kind of the process of acquiring Sound of Freedom, and what made you personally want to fight so hard to get it off the shelf and into the cinema?
I love how you shared that these are the stories of, thank you. How do we respond? I think that's the key question. I've been involved in faith-based filmmaking for 20 years, and I know that's a label. But I think what's powerful is when these stories are creating the impact. These people who are heroes of faith, who are motivated by their faith inspired, and they take action to save children, all these different levels, whether that's the foster system, you know, or Mother Cabrini, just seeing him on the streets. And I think when, the scripture tells us that faith without works is dead. And so I think we are so focused. We've had these amazing stories of conversion, but I think there's this time for us to be reminded of the heroes of the faith, of what are they doing, and that it also tells us in Matthew that when they see our good works, they'll glorify our Father in heaven. And so they may not be the works that save us, but our works help save other people. And so I think that's so important in our storytelling to remind us, what is the purpose of our faith if we aren't making change in the world? So when we saw Sound of Freedom, it just grabbed our hearts like it did everybody who saw that film. We showed it to the Angel Guild, and it scored one of our highest scores ever. And so we knew it felt like a responsibility. I remember we screened it with Eduardo at Verastegui, one of the producers, for the entire company. And afterwards, he got up and he said, "Now I hand the baton off to you." And we felt a responsibility to bring that film to audiences around the world. And because of that baton handoff, because 1,000 guild members voted, over 30 million people saw that story in theaters. And it created a global movement and awareness about an issue that people don't like to talk about at dinner parties. And so we're so grateful for that response. And all of the stories that we're hearing about here, it's fascinating to me, the tie-in to children that they have. We're excited about Possum Trot. The first conversation I had with Rebecca about that film, you shared the statistic, and it was on the screen on the trailer there, about that 90% of kids who are rescued from human trafficking were in the child welfare system. And as soon as you said that, it just grabbed my heart. Like, people saw the awareness of Sound of Freedom, and this is the next step to go upstream from the child trafficking problem and solve it at its root, to take care of these kids. And so I love the mission and purpose behind this film. And I can't wait for people to see it and for the change that will come next to continue what happened with Sound of Freedom to come out of Possum Trot.
I'm going to throw another one at you on that. So I came on at Angel in the middle of Sound of Freedom. And so you were there, you've been there a lot longer. So how would you say that kind of that big public reaction to the issue kind of affected the company's focus on cause-based impactful stories? So the company as a whole. Well, and also too, are you guys familiar with the Angel Guild? Do you know how Angel gets movies? So maybe we start there.
Yeah. So we care about solving these problems because we care. Not because of just I care, but because the audience cares. And so we have what we called the Angel Guild. If you go to angel.com/guild, you can join today, and you can be part of choosing the stories that that Angel's gonna bring. I don't get to decide. No executive at Angel gets to decide which movies that we're gonna tell. I get passionate about these stories, but when we get excited about them, we bring all of them to the Angel Guild. We're getting about 20 submissions a week from filmmakers that are telling stories that they think are that the audience wants. So the Angel Guild votes. You get to watch these films before anybody else. You get to vote and decide, and we ask the Angel Guild 2 questions. The first one is, does this story amplify light? And we define light as anything that is good, honest, true, noble, just, and excellent. And those are the kinds of stories that we want in the world, that we want our children to see. And so we asked the Angel Guild that. And the second one is, how would you feel if this story was never told? And you can say, I'm very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or not disappointed, it's not that good. And we're looking for people to be passionate about these stories. And the Guild is picky. Only about 6% of the submissions are getting greenlit by the Angel Guild. And so when those stories come through and we see a passionate response from the Angel Guild, from the audience, that's when we get excited about it at Angel, because we know it's going to have that impact, and we know it's going to be a story that people are passionate about. And so we need you to be involved. We think that's the problem with how the Hollywood system is broken. What we're trying to do at Angel is to create an alternative path so that these stories that amplify light can go straight to the market and can go straight to audiences. And so we're not dependent on Hollywood. We got amazing partnerships with exhibitors and distribution partners around the world. And so you have a chance to be a part of greenlighting these kind of stories, the ones that are creating change in our culture and reminding us of the goodness and beauty and truth that is in this world that we need so much. So if you don't know about the Angel Guild, that's what it is in a nutshell. Please join. You get to be a part of it. And as we do that together, that's what we help create change, rather than us just picking the movies that we think y'all ought to watch. You get to decide and be a part of it.
So, Alejandro, I'm going to throw in the wind past you. So, first, I want to say congratulations on Cabrini. I haven't gotten to say that to you yet today. I looked a little while ago and currently have a Rotten Tomatoes score of 89 with critics and 97% with fans. So it's very exciting. And my inbox personally is full of responses from people who saw the movie this weekend and were just incredibly impacted by the film. And we're so excited about it and wanting to invite their friends. And so it's been nice to have that be in my inbox for the last 24 hours. So, and you kind of already talked about what compelled you to make Cabrini, but your films have been really frequently tied to issues of the day, from Bella to Sound of Freedom with child trafficking, and now Cabrini with dignity stories of bringing dignity to immigrants and to underserved populations. Why do you focus your storytelling on your characters, how your characters' faith behaves in the world, as opposed to just their faith itself?
Well, first I just checked Rotten Tomatoes. It's 90.
Oh, yes. Yay.
90 by the critics, 98 by the audience. I'm just saying that because
Nice. It's getting better.
The critics have always been brutal with me, and it's just very refreshing to have all these top critics, at least not wishing me I was dead. But I'm just, to me, I call that I'm in surrender mode. I want to tell stories that somehow knock on my door. It's just that simple. There's not much. I always say, when they ask me, what's your next movie? I say, my next movie is the one that is actually getting made. As filmmakers, we're always working on a couple different projects. I just heard you guys were working on a movie for 14 years. I have a movie that I've been working for close to that as well. And it's, when you make a movie, it's a miracle. And I do believe movies, in many ways, have the potential to heal wounds. So I have my wounds, a lot of wounds, and I think we're all wounded beings because we are imperfect. And when I read a story or I hear a story that I know can heal any wound, in this case, Possum Trot, all those children that are wounded, but also if we connect with a story like that, I had the opportunity to see it, and I remember the next day I woke up and I was talking to my wife, and I said, hey, what do you think about adopting? And she was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, watch this movie and then we'll talk again. So I do feel that, any story that helps to heal the wounds of our souls, the wounds that we do to each other, but the greatest wound that we do is the ones that we do to ourselves. It's very interesting because it says, love your neighbor as you love yourself, but if you don't love yourself, how can you love your neighbor? A lot of the times there's a lot of self-hatred. And, we must conquer ourselves before we can, conquer anything we're facing. So stories that deal with that, I'm extremely attracted because that inspires, even when I'm hearing the story, it has to inspire first me in order for me to want to make the film, because I know that it has some kind of a healing element when you get to experience the film. I like to make, or watch, forget about what I make. I like to watch movies that become an experience, that I experience the film at a personal level, and stories like that are the ones that somehow, present themselves. Or a lot of the times, there could be a story that presents itself, but I can see a level of what that character was going through and how he overcame that particular challenge or battle in their lives. And you don't have to go through that battle, but you will somehow connect with the human strength that the character had to take. And, in Cabrini, there's a line that says, I can do all things in him who strengthens me. So it's where does that strength comes from? And at the end, if you scratch the surface, the greatest strength comes from God.
So Kayla, I have a couple questions for you. So one thing that's interesting is, Across is a documentary. Possum Trot and Cabrini and Sound of Freedom are narratives. So Kayla, I had a quick question for you. Your day job is as a producer for NBC News. What did you find that can be accomplished through film that you can't just through kind of the news? I know you've been embedded in lots of scary places lately. How is this different, getting to tell like a documentary story as opposed to what you do with your day job?
Too.
I know, right? I think, especially with immigration, I think when we cover the border, it's usually pretty reactionary. It's, there's, I remember there was maybe 15,000 Haitians that ended up in Eagle Pass 2 years ago. And so we go down and we assess the situation, we talk to people, and you get a few sound bites. You put the piece together, and then you move on. And with the Cross, it was a privilege to actually, Pastor John let me move in with some of the migrants and just be with them. I got to drive them to school. I got to know these people and their stories, and it was incredibly moving. You don't get that in news. In news, it's, you're in, you're out, you tell the story, you're done. And the beautiful thing about documentary filmmaking is that you actually get to let the stories unfold for weeks, months, years. I mean, ours was 5 years in the making. And I remember in 2019, when we first started, I didn't know if the film would be relevant, 5 years from now. And now you look at what's happening on the border, and it's more relevant than ever.
I would also add something about hearing filmmakers talk about dignity and the way the audience is able to recognize the dignity of people in a very new and transporting way. There's also something really powerful that happens on the other side of the camera where someone recognizes that their story, their own story, is important. And the cameras are focused on me. That is an incredible gift that filmmakers can give to a community. It's an incredible gift that filmmakers can give to a population, to say, we are gonna move our family to this town because your story matters, and you matter, and your healing matters. We are going to cover this story of children lost and futures destroyed because it matters. I remember vividly one mama, remember when they were taking the kids away from their mamas? And this mother had lost her child in the system. And we were searching desperately for her little girl. And she just shows up and she's like, if you just let me go and talk to the prison officials, I will tell them I am a mother and they will let me have my daughter back. And I was trying to it's just like, no, they don't care. They don't care about you. They don't care about your identity as a mama. And like when she came against that wall, it was so devastating. It's devastating to her heart, devastating to her soul. It's devastating to this understanding of her dignity as made in the image of God. And then hearing her sit in front of a big church that's just screened the documentary and hear her say, I want you to know that I'm a mama. And to have the whole congregation affirming her and clapping for her and embracing her, that is a huge gift that filmmakers give. It's a gift that Jesus gave to so many people, to look at him and I say, I see your whole story, but more than that, I see who you are in my eyes, in my Father's eyes. So thank you, filmmakers, and your very fancy cameras. They can be a very powerful gift.
One of the conversations I remember having with Alejandro and Rod Barr about Cabrini, as we were all the different layers of the messaging in that film, we were aware of the issues around immigration in the story and wondering how that would resonate and how to represent that in the marketing and the trailers and all those kinds of conversations, and trying to make the movie for everyone, not trying to make a political statement for one group against another, but to focus on the dignity. And I remember Rod Barr saying to me, Cabrini is the patron saint of the immigrant, not the patron saint of immigration. And I thought that was really fascinating because he was bringing it down to the person. And I think that's what you did in the film, is that you focused the story on the person. I'm curious, your own journey as an immigrant and telling the story, Alejandro, how do you hope people respond and discover that dignity?
Well, also, to your point, the movie is definitely not about policy or immigration. It's about the human being and the immigrant. But it helped me when I was rewriting the script with Rod, to explore my own experience as an immigrant in this country. And it also, the film, even though she arrived in a country where she experienced real racism against and discrimination against the Italian, where the woman had no voice, no vote, it also showed how beautiful and powerful and amazing this country is, because she was able to build an empire. I was able to build one of the greatest hospitals in the United States and in New York. That shows the power of this country. If you go, unfortunately, and I'm not trying to bash my country, Mexico, you can't do that, unfortunately. Here, you can have all the barriers you want, but the DNA of the country allows for stories of immigrants to have a happy ending. Myself, I came here, I didn't speak a word of English. Somebody told me it was easier for gold to rain than for me to get into the University of Texas, because I barely spoke English, and I was able to get in. So, through the kitchen, but I got in. So, it also shows the power and the beauty of this country. I owe everything to this country. I love this country, and I am an immigrant. And in the film, one of the things that we did, which is the subtext, throughout the film, we were working a lot with reflections, which is really, really difficult, because I wanted to present that when you come as an immigrant to this country, because everybody's an immigrant. If you look back, at one point, everybody was an immigrant in this country. You have the identity, your roots, where you came from, but then you have to embrace the new roots, the new identity here. And in the film, constantly, it makes it really difficult to shoot, but for me it was extremely important, because psychologically you can always constantly remind the two identities, and eventually that's who becomes one identity, because you always have to remember where you come from and embraced the American culture. And for me, it allowed me to go back and really, because you forget sometimes, to kind of explore my own story. And I'm just, I wanted to just use this opportunity to obviously promote Cabrini, but to also promote this country, because it just shows the beauty of this country.
All right, and a little UT, hook 'em horns, right? Hook 'em horns.
Yes.
Right?
Best school in the world.
So Josh and Rebecca, so Possum Trot's not your film debut. You made the impactful film To Save a Life in 2009, and you've made many other projects in between, including the breathtaking Butterfly Circus starring Nick Wojcik. If you guys have not seen Butterfly Circus, this is your assignment. When you go after tonight, go on YouTube and watch the short film Butterfly Circus. It's exceptional. It's a beautiful film, and you guys hear me rant about it all the time, so I'm sharing the Butterfly Circus love. Do you feel like those are mission-based projects, and did those kind of tee you up to be able to kind of tell the story of Possum Trot better?
Well, I acted in To Save a Life. I didn't make it. It was way back. That was fun, though. And I think that's how we met.
That's how we met. Yes.
Anyway, I guess the answer to that for me is more just how I approach this in life in general. You know, I don't know how those informed Possum Trot or not. I think going back further, though, really, I don't know if it's much different than what anyone following Jesus ought to be doing. You know, the way that we approach our projects is, Lord, what do you want us to do? You know, and He's made us all in a specific way, in a particular way that he knows can be used in a certain way. And I think we're going to align with the things, the artistic mentality and sentiment we might have. We're going to align with that. So really that's where we start, is just what is it that you want us to do? And I know that part of my nature as a person is feeling the need to really go where the pain is, to go where the stories are hard, to go where it's uncomfortable to go. I mean, I'll just say I've followed Jesus my whole life, but I've never really related to what's called faith-based media or entertainment or anything like that. I had a very hard time with that. I was really actually very embarrassed to be a Christian when I was younger because of it. It made it hard for me to publicly talk about being a Christian, because I just felt kind of in the shadow of all these things that I didn't understand, that didn't reflect me. And that's not why I pursue film and storytelling. I do that because I feel called to that and I love it. But it's just something I think is relevant for us as we're trying to learn how to create, as people who follow Jesus. What are the limitations? Where's the gold? How do we do this well? And I think one thing is being willing to go into the stories that are really hard to tell well, and the courage that it takes to go to those places is not something that what's been called the faith-based market has been comfortable with. And it's sad to me because we miss out on so much. We don't represent Jesus well because of that fear of going to the places that are hard and, really expressing the Lord's heart in those places. So that's, in essence, what it is. I really related to that story where Moses is told to go to lead all of these people into the promised land. And he says, Lord, if your presence doesn't go with me, then I'm not going, And I remember feeling that as a young person, just figuring this all out. Lord, I love entertainment, but I'm really not that interested in just entertainment. I want to do things that entertain. But if the presence of God isn't experienced in what I'm doing, then I'm not interested. I feel like I've failed in some way, I feel like there's too much of me in that. And so that's what we want to do. Go where it's hard. And that's the call for anyone following Jesus. Go where it's hard and deal with the situation. So whether you're an artist or filmmaker, whatever, that's what we're here for in part. So we try to do that, looking for his leadership, and then what is it going to take to do this well? What are you willing, Lord, to put your presence on, to be associated with, to be experienced? And that's what we hope, because that's where change ultimately, I think, happens.
Yeah. And I'll just say with that, yes, he lives it too. Serves his family and me so well. Yeah, and we got to experience just a little bit of that with Butterfly Circus. Is just, my passion was psychology, and I was actually always his biggest cheerleader, and was like, I believe in you, you're gonna go make films, and I'm gonna, counsel and help people. But when we made Butterfly Circus together, and we started getting like emails from people around the world saying, I was about to commit suicide, and I watched the film, and God spoke to me and told me I had value, I had purpose, I had meaning, and I decided not to commit suicide. And, over and over, we started just getting these stories, and he's like, see, that would have taken years of counseling, Rebecca. He's like, and I'm like, that's so true. I'm not going to be a counselor anymore. I'm
way more
films.
efficient to make a movie.
So that's our heart, that's our passion. I love the storytellers up here too. I mean, just seeing the stories coming out. And I just want to give a shout out to Angel Studios too for allowing storytellers like us to have a voice when we haven't had a voice for a long time, to be honest, because Hollywood has had a certain type of film that they're making. And then there's the faith-based, arena. And there really hasn't been, a place for storytellers who are willing to go in and tell hard things and tell authentic stories that deal with faith, but are not your typical faith-based budgets and, stories. And I just want to say thank you, Jared. We've been praying for this moment for many, many years, that there would be an opportunity and an outlet for stories, epic stories like Cabrini that show the beauty of God and show people truth and give meaning and purpose to people. And so thank you, Angel Studios. Thank you for that opportunity. Taking risks on filmmakers and films that, typically don't get that opportunity.
I'm kind of curious about that. I'd like to turn that kind of into an all skate a little bit, kind of from what you said. I don't love the term faith-based. I always like faith-inspired because I like a lot better. Just because I feel like so many times faith-based films just are the ones that won't tackle those uncomfortable issues, like you said. And so I'm curious, because all of your films have really uncomfortable scenes in them. What makes you say yes to that, knowing that you're going to get pushback? There's uncomfortable things, and that these are hard topics. So what makes you say yes to that calling, kind of knowing that not everyone's going to love it?
I can say for Possum Trot, it was a challenge because I probably leaned too much into the real, and with this one, it was important to tell it in a way that many, many people could watch. I mean, some people there's only so much trauma you can watch before you're going to just leave the room, or maybe you won't even go. And we didn't want to scare people with that kind of reality. And frankly, it's just not that. It doesn't go to that place. But it's got to have enough of the real so that you're honest about it, And I think that's where this is difficult when you're trying to work in an industry that's making money, and you can't continue if you don't make money for those who are funding things, and there's that sort of somewhat ugly reality to it. So there is this tension where you're trying to figure out, how do I express this story truthfully in a way that's going to change things, but maybe doesn't lean too far in the direction it could go with the darkness. But I mean, we literally had people, in the faith film business, considering this project and going, do we have to talk about rape? I mean, can't we just tell them that the kid was taped his mouth was taped and put in a closet? And I was just, that's the heartbreaking part, is that as believers, we're so afraid to go where Jesus would have been. And so, in some sense, it depends on who the movie is made for. Maybe you can go pretty deep if it doesn't really matter. But first of all, we just have to be willing to do what we are called to as followers of Jesus. And that's just going to come with challenge. So I could go on and on about that. We need a lot more time on that subject for creatives like us and you, but it's really a critical issue, I think, that's going to separate our work moving forward. And so the opportunity we're seeing with Angel and the era we're in, there's something brewing and it's exciting, but if you can't be honest, you can't go there as an artist, and you don't have the support of people to resource it, we'll never get the stories told as they should be.
I, interestingly, was on the other side of that. So I was the pastor of some of the folks who were being filmed in the documentary. And there's a number of times where I said, no, you cannot tell that story. You cannot ask that question. It's very annoying to the filmmaker, but because sometimes the stories can re-traumatize. Or they can bring people down back into that drowning experience. But I would also say about Angel Studios. I was coming up here, I mentioned it to a friend, not a Christian, hasn't watched anything from Angel Studios at all. He's like, oh, Angel Studios, that's the company that says, come and see? And I don't know how he got that, how the marketing came across. Is like, he's quoting scripture saying, oh, that's the company that says, come and see. And I think when we are living into that message, that come and see, we are not coming to bear witness to the rape. We're not coming to bear witness to the horrors. We're coming to bear witness to the response to that trauma. And that is what you did in Possum Trot, which is so powerful. It's a come and see moment. And we have to remember, come and see was uttered in response to skeptic racism. That response by Philip to Nathaniel, who's like, nothing good comes from there. There are no good people there. That is a horrible place. Those people are no good. Build a wall, keep them out. We don't want those people. Philip is able to say, come and see, because he's already participating in the story. He's participating in the story. He's inviting people into the story. That's what's really rad about Angel Studios. Is because you're not just making films, you're creating communities, you're jumping into communities where there's already this beautiful work happening, and you're just saying to my buddy and folks in the northern suburbs of San Antonio, just come and see. And so I applaud you all for that as well, so thank you.
Yes.
I think we're in an amazing renaissance or era of, I look at what's in the box office this weekend. There are 3 movies that are faith-inspired in the top 10 right now, with The Ordinary Angels and the work of the Kingdom Story Company is doing. Fantastic film. We got to support those films. Cabrini's out. The Chosen's in theaters. This is an amazing time where you've got these faith-inspired stories. And I think it's because audiences want them. And I think we can't take that for granted. This is something you said, it's something we've been praying for. I've been praying for a long time as well. And so it's such a privilege to be creating platforms for these stories that amplify light. And we hope that it creates impact for our families and the kids. So it's a privilege to be a part of them.
Well, thanks you all. We're so grateful for you being on our panel. And thanks y'all for being here. We hope you enjoy South by Southwest.